All right, welcome everybody. Hope you guys had a nice lunch and break and you're ready to hear about security, which is definitely a hot topic in the streaming world today. I'm Jason Thibeault. I'm the Executive Director of the Streaming Video Alliance. If you're not aware of us, we are a trade association that brings companies across the video ecosystem together to solve critical challenges and make a better video experience. So some of our member companies are, Google, Amazon, Comcast, Verimatrix, Fox, Limelight Networks. Kudelski actually is a member as well. So all member companies up here. I have with me a really fantastic panel. I mean, when it comes to stream security, these guys know what they're talking about. I mean, from technology, from content perspectives. So what I want to do is I just want to let them introduce themselves for a little bit. And then after that, you'll meet him in a second. Ron from Fox has some really cool slides to talk about with some data, some experiential data, Fox with some UHD content and their security experiences around that. So we'll let him sort of talk through those slides, and then we'll dive into some questions about security in general. We'll talk a little bit about some of the technology, some of the business issues, and then hopefully we'll wrap up with some audience questions at the end. So I'm going to start with introductions with Steve from Limelight.
Thanks, JT. Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Miller-Jones from Limelight Networks. I'm the VP of Product Strategy. From a security perspective, I think as a CDN, we've seen for a long time that there are demands on us to help implement technologies to secure the streams, to lock them to individual consumers or geographies, to help ensure that there is some form of encryption, or to help implement standards-orientated mechanisms for helping the rights owners and content distributors to manage that. So we've looked at that from the perspective of the CDN and video packaging services over the sort of 8 or so years that I've been at Limelight. So that's me.
Fantastic. Peter.
I'm Peterka. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Verimatrix. We do content protection, which means conditional access, digital rights management, forensic watermarking, data analytics, really helping content owners and operators, distributors to protect content, which really means protect their revenue. I have kind of a sad statement to make. I've been in this industry for, gosh, I shouldn't say 30 years, and I have to say, as a community, we are still failing to combat piracy. It's still with us, and which means we still have jobs, right?
Full employment.
So it's challenging. It's challenging.
Right. Awesome, Ron.
Yes, I'm just thinking I'd love to put myself out of a job and into retirement soon, but I can't quite afford to do that. I'm Ron Wheeler. I'm SVP of Content Protection Technology and Strategy at 20th Century Fox, the movie studio. Before, in my previous position, I actually was in charge of content protection for all of what's now 21st Century Fox, soon to be 21st Century Fox / Disney. Speaking of retirement. And I certainly echo Petr's comment. I've been not 30 years in the business. I started in 2001. But I would put a slightly different spin on it. I agree that we're still failing as a community. Everyone has a stake in the protection of content and therefore the protection of the revenue streams that we all have that derive from content and its distribution. But I actually am encouraged just in the last few years, I would say that there is more cooperation than I have ever seen. So not enough, for sure, but there is more than I've ever seen. So just a slight bit of a half glass, or glass being half full in my case.
Fantastic. David.
So my name is David Wurgler. I'm a Senior Director of Anti-Piracy Litigation for Kudelski. Kudelski is a complete security vendor with a 360 approach to piracy, protecting the content, but also doing content protection online whenever, when everything is out there and trying to take it down and away and so on. And I echo some of the comments here made that actually, we really need to get the business and the industry to work together and so on. But I also think that we as a business, especially the TV industry, which I've been working for past too many years, worldwide, basically has done much, much better than a lot of other industry. If you look at the music industry, I think what are they at? Like 20% of what they used to be at because of the internet. If you look at the TV industry, we're not even close to that. We haven't taken a hit like that. But if we're not careful, development is not really going in the right direction because some of the pirates out there, some of the platforms out there is actually immensely The offers are fantastic, and the product is great for the consumers. It offers much more sometimes than the legal offerings, and the price is lower, and the convenience is better. So that's some of the challenges that we have, but the only way to actually combat them is to combine forces, everyone in the business. So I think that's a key statement. And of course, to implement the best and newest technology, right? Because we can't just say, oh, because this one won't solve it all, we won't do that. You got to do as much as possible. Anti-piracy is not about doing one thing, about doing everything at the same time.
Yep.
So I think that's my key message.
Yep. Cool. All right, so we're gonna dive into your slides.
Sure.
So let me actually see if I can bring this up. Not yet.
They were there, I thought.
Yeah, I had them.
Yeah, I was going to say they were there before.
Okay, let's do this.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, shall I maybe just stand up real quick? All right, so this is just a few factual slides. Jason already mentioned that actually to get us maybe stimulate the rest of the discussion. This is actually real life experience with one, which is only one, to echo David's point, of the technologies that are useful in fighting piracy. Forensic watermarking and a full deployment of it in conjunction with other mechanisms. So the premise of this is a case study that you'll see. It involves Korea, South Korea. UHD and HDR, as I'm sure you're all familiar with, and early window, which is the particular thing I'm going to return to. They're the most attractive pirate sources they are. It's what every pirate wants to send to his customers, whether they're paid or ad-supported customers. So as a content owner, Fox, our goal is to actually make money off of this high-quality content and early window content, so urgent content, but without stimulating additional piracy when we make it available. So the way we do that is forensic watermarking and related measures like geolocation, which I'm not going to talk about anymore. The four elements are distributor mark that we put on in our basically mastering and distribution infrastructure to identify the various people that we send the content to, so that we can quickly see, well, when we have a leak, where did it come from? We have our distributors, in this case, we were successful in persuading our distributors to include a warning card to users, because of course the main purpose of this is deterrence rather than punishment. So we want to prevent people from stealing the content in the first place, and then the few bad apples that steal it anyway, we go after them. The key element here is the session-based watermark on each transmission to end users. So this happens to be VOD content. So each VOD purchaser or renter of the content is given a unique code that companies like this gentleman's company create the technology to do that. And then, of course, the punishment of the few bad apples is the last piece. All right, so Korea, I've already talked about a lot of the points on this slide. The interesting thing about this case study is it's actually several years now. So actually it's 4.5 years. So our first release was early 2014. We've got 35 data points to point to in this case. So in Korea, we and other movie studios, including the locals, have been able to create an ecosystem for early releases. That's the first release in anywhere in the world for us and for the fellow studios who are engaged in this. 35 of ours, and as I said, everyone else is, most of everyone else is participating. It's called SPVOD, and then so we've tried to prevent this from being a worldwide source of piracy for everywhere, both for Korea and outside Korea. Next slide, please. So again, this is the sort of another representation that's specific to Korea. The session-based watermark I've talked about already. Pre-roll warning card, I know it's impossible to see, but I can tell you once I get closer what it says. Are you aware, and it says it in Korean, but this is translation. Are you aware, do you know that you can be punished for illegal copying and distribution? And the key point for us, the individual who copies or distributes this video without authorization can be identified and verified through a technological tracking system and can be held liable for money damages or punished according to related laws. That's a reference to criminal. So that's the warning card, which we're really happy about because it's just as important as the technology as far as we're concerned. And then we happen to, because it's a foreign language and a subtitle country, we use burned-in Korean subtitles to make it the content less valuable outside of Korea. Next, please. Okay, this is the money slide. early window results. So these are the 35 releases I already talked about. As you can see, different experiences across the 35. The key takeaways I think I'd like to make is that a lot of these titles are big titles. I point Deadpool 2 here on the far end, if you can see that. 35 days with no piracy anywhere in the world of that high quality early window release that was released in Korea. That is the jackpot for any content owner. We are the exclusive distributor of a high quality version of that title for 35 days all over the world. Now, the downside, again, it goes back to the issue about how we all have to fight this together. It's just two titles later, The Predator, terrible movie, sorry, Fox bosses. Not nearly as good a movie to pirate as Deadpool 2. It was pirated the same day it was released. Very disappointing. But the other point is the trend point I want to bring across. Look at the 7 releases, starting with Kingsman, again, very successful movie and attractive to pirates, where we got 23 days. And 18, 19, 29, 28, 18, 35. That's a tremendous run. And the goal that we're all, I think, hoping to see someday is that's the routine. Routinely, you get a month of no piracy in your new releases. The counterpart on the TV side is you go months or between having live streams that are popular, widely consumed, and cords being cut. So the real point here, one last slide which summarizes it. So we've actually had 14 of those cases that are all color-coded, not worth going into. There were actually no uploads at all during the early window piece, in some cases because it's already been pirated. In other cases, it was never pirated. And again, even if you look at the whole 35 releases, the average is almost 10 days for all of them, and the 9, even with the Predator in there, is 20 plus days because of the 7 in a row that were so high. So by comparison, as David and others know, everything else that doesn't have a forensic watermark, doesn't have a warning card, pirated immediately. I mean, it's 0 in every single case in the world, everywhere. Everything's pirated immediately, but not in Korea. So the last point is that 8 individuals have been arrested and convicted or finished their criminal prosecution, and there are a bunch of more cases in the pipeline. So even in those disappointing cases like Predator, it was just last Friday, so no one's been arrested yet. But the thought is eventually people start feeling a little pain from being engaged in piracy, which they never do. It's routinely described as the easiest crime in the world because it's so hard to get caught and so meaningless when you do. These people did get caught and they paid a price, and that's the sort of the other benefit of this technology is you can start imposing pain on pirates. And if we ever did get to a point where everyone was doing this all over the world for all kinds of content, there would be hundreds or maybe even thousands of piracy cases at first, and I bet dollars to donuts that would slowly fall over time because there would be fewer people engaging in it. So I just wanted to share that with everybody because there's a whole bunch of thoughts that hopefully are stimulated from that information. Thank you.
No, thanks for that. That's obviously a great testament to the fact that there are technologies and processes in play and at work that are deterring or preventing piracy. So let's kick off some of these questions then. I mean, one of the things that I find very interesting is to ask people in the industry sort of what do you think about the state of piracy today? So, you just showed us these great slides and it's only one country and it's only one content owner, but, is piracy going up right now? Are there more pirates than there were, 18 months ago? Is it going down? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? David.
So I think that the answer to that question is that it's getting worse because the quality of the piracy services is so much better than it used to be. Right? So now it's not just a matter of maybe you can get one VOD stream from somewhere, whatever. Now you get boxes with thousands and thousands of linear TV, live events, live sports. And then on top of that, they have thousands and thousands and thousands of films and videos, whatever, in the VOD catalogs, in the boxes, and they will sell them for 9, 10, 15 bucks a month, right? So, that content is easily good enough to bring it to the big screen in the home, in the living room, and so on. So that's actually a seriously contender to what used to be. Used to be on the internet, in the teenage rooms, people were, the kids were surfing around, finding a stream for something, and then they had to surf around, find another stream, or they had to download something and wait for whatever. Now it's with the remote, it's in the living room, it's for the family. So in that aspect, it's getting worse now. In other aspects of it, we have a lot of tools. Like Ron just went through here. There are a lot of tools available. The thing is, everybody needs to implement all these tools, and everybody needs to cooperate with each other, right, to get to that point. So,
I agree with what you said, and I started kind of on a negative note. But I think at the same time, I think some of the stats, and maybe Ron, you have more data, people also watch more content legally, right? So we are doing something right, but we haven't solved the problem because piracy is getting easier, right? In the old days, it was just conditional access, make sure it gets to the right person, and then protect the smart card, right?
Yeah.
It was kind of easy then. But now content is distributed over any network to any device, and the same technology that enables this proliferation of legal content, this whole streaming and OTT that we are talking about, the very same tools are being used by the bad guys, right? The same encoding that is now available on every phone, the almost unlimited bandwidth that allows people to do restreaming, they use the same technology to run their business. So that's why it's getting, more and more difficult.
yeah, and for the regular consumers, it's immensely difficult to find out who is the real good guys and who are the bad guys, right?
That's true.
My mom wouldn't know. She really wouldn't know if she were buying a pirate service or a legitimate service. Look at the logos, look at the quality of service. They even have, customer services. You can call them up. They're probably sometimes a shorter wait, than the regular guys. It's crazy. So in that aspect, there's a lot of learnings that we need to get out there, and the public needs to know what's going on as well. So it's a huge effort that we need to go through.
I'd heard a comment somebody made one time that, piracy used to be the purview of hackers. Like you had to be, super geeky technology guy in your basement, Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, your average Joe with a smartphone can legitimately pirate live content and, put it on Facebook. It gets taken down right away. But it's this concept now, you don't need to be a technological expert to do it. I thought it was a very interesting comment.
Yeah, no, I just to weigh in on that. I agree that from a user perspective, piracy has never been easier or higher quality, and therefore a more direct substitute for a cable subscription or a satellite subscription, or frankly even Netflix or Amazon. It's not limited to so-called traditional business models. It's a perfect substitute for paying for content in any form. Right. So from a user perspective, it clearly is getting worse in that regard. The one thing I will say that on the other side is, as I think I mentioned, already, I'm sure I did, there is a little bit more of a recognition of this now among the distribution community. Yeah. Frankly, they're the ones who are now paying the sort of price that we've been paying since Napster was invented in the late 1990s. It was music, but they get the point, Grokster, whatever, for video. And they're losing customers. So the cord cutting phenomenon is usually described more or less exclusively as an economic thing where it's just too expensive for your cable subscription. But there is all kinds of documentation that the availability of free or low cost, a lot of them aren't free actually, but much lower cost pirate services is a factor in cord cutting. So what I've seen is the distribution community starting to get interested. They're the ones who actually have the customer information. They're the ones who can know who's engaged in, ridiculous amounts of uploading or downloading of content using their broadband subscription that they have. And they're starting to now count that information. It's literally just now happening. They're starting to count the number of their customers, their broadband customers engaged in piracy, and they know that those people used to have video subscriptions from them or from someone else. And so in that regard, we're starting to hone in on what has been essentially an amorphous sense of the millions and millions of people around the world engaged in piracy to now like how many Comcast subscribers are available. Yep. We're starting to get to that level, and it's for the first time ever. So again, you have to know what the scope of your problem is before you can get interested in solving it. So from that perspective, things are getting better in terms of awareness.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, and it's, so I get privy to a lot of different kinds of companies as part of the Streaming Video Alliance, right? We have content owners like Viacom and operators like Comcast and service providers like Limelight Network. So I get to have conversations with lots of different people about sort of what's happening from a security perspective. And we had a conversation with the North American operator who said, just to Ron's point, they thought about 10% of their subscribers were broadband only, were consuming pirated streams from services that David had talked about, like these really great high quality services, and they were freaking out because they didn't understand how to stop it. They termed it, and it was predominantly live linear, but they termed it stream leakage. So they had this big stream leakage problem, and they were like talking to us going, we're working with NCTA and other operators, how do we solve this? And so I'm going to pick on Steve here for a second. Obviously we have lots of technologies, right? We have box technology, we have great forensic watermarking, awesome DRM. What are some of the other things that can be done besides that to protect content? And the reason I ask you that is I did talk to a content owner who said that they do things like manual log analysis of their subscribers. So when they see anomalies in traffic from certain IP addresses and certain subscribers, they'll turn them off for a little bit and kind of see if they complain. If they don't complain, they're like, oh, pirate. If they do complain, they'll turn them back on, and they do it again, oh, pirate. So there's lots of these processes going on. What can we do? I mean, technologically would be great, but what can they do?
Yeah, so I guess you could look at it as a technology problem, right? If you apply all the mechanisms you have is end-to-end as far as you can to protect the content, and you then start doing what you're talking about, looking at the data processing of what people are consuming. So you could use, to throw a couple of phrases out, you could start to think about how to deploy some form of algorithms to identify and understand patterns in traffic consumption usage. So that, maybe we can get around the issues of, the democratization of data and my personal privacy of people looking at what am I doing online all the time, but looking at the ebb and flow of data to identify likely hotspots or individual locations or accounts, right? It depends how granular you get, to identify what is normal behavior for a household of 4 consuming content, gaming, doing Twitch, which is two-way communication, and someone who's a pirate, which doesn't quite look the same, right? So looking at all the different protocols that are in play, trying to understand what does a normal flow of content look like, that would be a way I'd look at it. And we were talking just before we started as well about, is it too difficult to use the owner-branded applications? And there was a conversation in this room earlier, before lunch, about advertising and how consumers don't want to watch the adverts or the commercials during the streams or before the stream. So I'm sure part of it is about the design of the packaging of the legitimate services, but in that legitimization is born the cost of the rights, which is not ever borne by the pirates, we were talking around that point earlier just outside the door. So, from a technology perspective, I think if we were to protect our data privacy and wear that hat for a minute, we'd have to think about, ISPs or service providers looking at what does a normal data flow look like, and can we, from groups like the SVA or standards-oriented bodies, identify how should we think about that? How should we approach, in a standard-oriented way, how to describe what we think of as normal behavior, so that we could then approach it rather than as piecemeal individual solutions that we need 20 of. How can we approach it in a standards way? I don't know what the answer is, but I think that's if we started thinking about it from that perspective, then we're protecting our consumers' rights and data. We're trying to gain access to a industry-wide or a solution that could be deployed with multiple parties rather than just one, or need 20 of them. And we're still thinking about the end-to-end problem.
I think the fact that we have now access to tremendous amount of data, because all of these, or most of these distribution networks are two-way networks, right? Whether it's a IPTV streaming, or whether it's unmanaged OTT streaming, it's all two-way communication. Every device, every phone, every connected television, they all have to request the content. They all have to authenticate. They all have to request keys. And you see this traffic, and even without getting into the issue of privacy, just connections. You can apply, again, new technologies like machine learning to find the right patterns. If you watch your TV the way you do, it has a certain pattern in it and certain level of randomness. But if you are stealing content, you actually look very different and you stand out. And there are technologies who can pick that up. So yes, looking at the log files is a good idea, but not manually. Yeah. You better automate that because you don't have that many people in the data center. So that's certainly.
It can be automated.
Yes, can and should be automated, and needs to be part of the overall package, right? You need to protect the content so that it goes only to the legitimate subscribers. Then you need to monitor what's happening in your network with your devices. And then you need to be able to trace the content through forensic watermarking. So it's a holistic approach to protecting the content in its entire life cycle.
I think there's another thing that we really need to focus on as well, is to understand who we're competing against, right? You gotta understand the pirates. You gotta know what they're offering. You gotta, buy the services. You gotta analyze them. You gotta look into them, see where they're coming from, which ecosystems are they using. What data points are they using? Who was involved in this? Build cases against these, like the Dish case. I think we probably just saw here, right? The 90 million damages. It's a huge win for the content industry, like companies like Dish, taking the step forward here. So it is possible to do stuff, right? But you need to do this in a strategic and in a good way, right? And there are companies like ours and others that can actually help people build these strategies and help them make things in the right way, because it's not enough just to spend $10 on anti-piracy. You've got to spend the $10 right. And there's not, and we had that discussion before, right? It says, sometimes, why don't we just do this? Why don't we do that? And then people say, yeah, but from which budget, right? Who's going to pay for it? Because everybody has their own small budgets and they don't want to give, But then if you finally manage to get, I should pay for it, exactly, yeah. But if you've actually managed to get some money out of it, spend it the right way. Actually make sure that you understand what you're doing and spend it in the right way.
So if I could ask Ron a question. Apologies.
Who's running the panel? Come on.
This guy. Yeah. If there is
he's running roughshod.
If that the point is true that there's this cost, there's this $10, whatever the number is, right? Add millions to that, but whatever. There's this money to spend. But the conversation we were having just outside was actually that the people that are paying the price of the privacy are not the same people with the same budget. So do you have a comment or a suggestion on how we would look at how to spread the ownership of that budget so that it is the same people, so that it's more of a common cause?
Right. Well, yes is the answer. So the fact is, the first step is awareness. So you have to have a negotiating partner. So in Korea, just to return to that example, it's 9, I think the number is 9 online platforms, some of which are both broadcast platforms and online. And we had to negotiate who's going to pay for the costs associated with all of this. And it's should be obvious, but I'll just underscore it. In exchange, they get early window content that no one else in the world gets. They're the first releasers of those movies anywhere in the world, so that there's a real benefit to them. And then you can have that conversation. It's like, okay, we understand the benefit. This is the bucket of the costs associated with this technology and the infrastructure and supporting the police when they come calling and all that other thing. And so let's divide the pie in this way for that country. But what you need, up to now, it's been difficult to even get to the point of having a negotiation about who's going to bear which costs, because the distributors, for the most part, didn't have cord cutting. They had cord additions every year, every quarter, and everything's fine. Why would I want to talk to you about doing some anti-piracy thing with you? That's just an additional cost I don't have today, and I have no interest in bearing, and so I don't even want to sit down and have a meeting with you about that. But now those those meetings are occurring. And yeah, so every situation is going to be different. I've learned a lot about the world of broadcasting, which is not my background, and it's hugely more expensive to broadcast, to do piracy in a broadcast environment than in an online environment in many cases. So then we have a different set of cost discussions to have. But we're having those discussions now, and that's what's really encouraging to me, and I think we're going to get somewhere.
So I think the right time to have the discussion about anti-piracy budgets is when you're actually making the distribution agreements.
Yeah, well,
because that's when
the background of the
that's when you know the money is there. You know, you're spending so and so many billions or whatever, Premier League or whatever. At that point, you need to say, okay, we'll set off X amount of money for anti-piracy, because then it's easier to get it done, right? If you come after that, the money is spent, right? Everybody has their budget. There's no budget left. Right. So it has to be when the deal is struck that you actually think about anti-piracy. So basically, I think it's like everybody, like cybersecurity, right? So every time you develop a new product, you do something, you got to think security into it, right?
Yes.
That's how it is today, right? It's exactly the same thing with content. Every time you make a movie, every time you make, you make live sports or whatever, you got to think piracy into it. Every time you try to sell it, you got to think piracy into it, because that's your biggest competitor, basically, right? Yep. So I think for me, that's the key message. You got to have the discussion about anti-piracy a lot sooner than you have now, right?
Okay. Yeah. So let's jump a little bit into more into the technology. So we did the SVA, our working group, Privacy and Protection, did a watermarking paper. So the challenges of forensic watermarking implementation in streaming media, and they looked at the technology, like what does forensic watermarking look like, and how can you do it? Everyone in the industry has an opinion. Like Verimatrix has a great product. Kudelski bought NextGuard, which contributed to the paper as well. So there's lots of this technology out there with different approaches. The question that I have for you guys, though, is why hasn't the entire industry implemented it? Is it just cost? Is it just a factor of cost, or is it something more? Is it something like, hey, we're just gonna, do this for a little while, and then when it becomes really crazy, we're gonna, force ourselves to implement something? I mean, what are your opinions on that? I'd love to know.
Well, from our side, so I'm a service provider, right? So we work with our customers to help distribute their content in a secure way to the end users, and there are a number of technologies that are either in the request and response flow, in the HTTP side, like cause headers and media vault, tokenization, all the geo pieces which are straightforward, and then there are all the options that go on top of that. So when we're delivering the stream, do we want to encrypt it, and which format should we use, and so on and so on, or do we want to use watermarking? And we're going to do that in, say, following the SVA guidelines, for example, or working with our partners. So we have some implementations of that in the edge of the network, so we can do the watermarking and the manifest manipulation. It's all very exciting. I think if I step back a few years, I remember seeing, working with some potential customers and looking at the contracts they had, and there was basically a list of, you will have one of these items, one or more of these items, which were tokenization. It was RTMP still at the time, so tokenization, Swift verification, RTMPE, geo-blocking, and or an encryption. It was like, okay, I'm going to tick the two easiest. You do those. Let's go. Of course. So there's definitely this. The way I see it, when it arrives on my table, which is way after the discussion on the rights ownership and the distribution timescales and the windows and what should we do in the rights contract. It's way after that. So I have a bunch of tick boxes. I'll throw blockchain in there for good fun, but don't know why it's useful yet.
Because blockchain has to be mentioned in every list.
Yeah, there's a box called blockchain here, which should we tick that box? I don't know. Yeah. But I think it comes to us with a choice. So from my perspective, our aim, and from a product perspective, our aim at Limelight is to introduce services that are really orientated, being able to be implemented as a standard rather than 1,000,005 different ways of doing things. Because of course, I can't do something differently every single time. It's a very heavy development overhead to take unless we build microservices that people can use themselves, which is also another product strategy that we're following. But here are a series of products and services that can be configured, managed, and utilized to protect content in the way that's described that the distributor wants to follow. So we approach it that way. We get a lot of requests for different things. DRM encryption was a big request for us, I'd say 2016, 2017. And 2017 through 18, we've begun to see more requests for watermarking. So it does go in waves.
So I agree that, if it is an optional thing, that, why would you do it? Second thing is, and I think this is why SVA and also Ultra HD Forum did a great job. There's a little bit of magic behind forensic watermarking, right? I think most people by now understand how encryption works, and it starts here, it ends here, done, right? With forensic watermarking, you can't see it, but I can trace it, and even if you camcord it, it still stays there. Really sounds like magic. And so awareness, education, understanding how the technology works, how it gets implemented and integrated, because it adds complexity, but understanding what the integration points are, what the impact on the overall network is, and hopefully minimizing it, that is another step that has been, I think, taken, and thank you, SVA, for doing that with all of the vendors that participated. So I think that's part of that answer, too.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree with everything that has just been said. From a content owner's perspective, I'll just be honest for a second. Obviously, when in a distribution negotiation, there's a long list of mandatory things. Actually, they're not optional things.
Well, they become optional by the time it gets to the CDN.
That's right. And
Well,
not
maybe they're not anymore.
Yeah, well, and in every single deal, it's like there's a single deal, as I'm sure everyone thinks, where you get 100% of what you start out asking for. So forensic watermarking is at the beginning of the list, especially years ago. First of all, what the hell is forensic watermarking? And these are the salespeople at the distributors, it's not the engineering group, and so forth. So that quickly became not only optional, but off the list. Didn't even reach Steve's desk. So, but as I said, the good news is, over the time, a lot of it is education. So they don't say, what the hell is this anymore? So that's no longer the barrier. And in fact, fear of the unknown, obviously, FUD is something you have to get past before you can have a discussion about, okay, now we do know what it is you're asking for, and here's our issues with it, because it still doesn't mean that it's easy. It becomes magically, there's not magic about how easy it is to implement. It's a lot of NRE and actually ongoing and expense, real expense. And so you can start having the negotiation I was mentioning earlier about, okay, what if we only did, TV everywhere as opposed to the live streams, or something like to start. Or you can start having those discussions, and you can also have them on a worldwide basis, because obviously we distribute our content worldwide. So in the UK, I think there was a reference to Premier League already, but there's also UEFA, and they're actually further along by far in their conversations with their licensees of the football rights. Soccer rights, and it's done. Their licensees have gone ahead and implemented a full suite of technologies to both forensically watermark their content and also identify the sources of the illegal streams and shut them down and turn off their accounts from that distributor. Sky in particular, still a sister company of ours for a couple more months, gets the gold star for advanced anti-piracy, basically using every advanced anti-piracy technique there is, and it's working beautifully for, I don't work for EPL, but they've announced many times how pleased they are with it. So you just have to, but it took many, many years for them to get to that point, and it's only now become a finely honed machine. And with luck and tons of hard work, I would love to see that essentially spread from the UK to here, and around Asia I think is very promising. There's the learning curve seems to be steeper there, in a good way, shorter. And I think we can get to a world where essentially everybody is familiar with gold standard techniques and is actually using them according to negotiated cost sharing.
It's about consistency, right? You can't just use it a little bit here and a little bit there.
And only a few people using it. So the one thing that's is a little bit unfortunate in the UK is it's only EPL and UEFA so far. It would be great if we could get it broadly deployed in the UK and have it be a complete ecosystem. But I think we might get there.
All right, let's pause for just a second. We've got about 5 minutes left. Are there any questions from audience members for the panel? Sir.
So what are the most common sources of leakage from your guys' perspective?
Okay, so let me, so what are the most common sources of leakage from the perspective of the panel?
So I can take that. I think the leakage is everywhere it's possible, right? So there's tons of ways to do this. You can hack stuff. You can go in. You can hack a private smart card, and you can hack a decoder. You can infiltrate an account. You can steal that or whatever. Or you can just take it free to air from some other region in the world. Basically, pirates will never do anything more than absolutely necessary. And that's also why it's not enough that Fox does whatever they do. Everybody needs to do it, because as long as there's somebody out there who's not living up to the standards, they'll just steal it from there. So basically, it's not an easy question to answer. It's a good question, but it's not easy because there's not just one source, right? There are so many sources, right? And it's so, somebody in the panel mentioned here before, and I think you did, right? You can just, any Joe, average Joe, can just take out his cell phone and then start filming it, putting it on Facebook Live. There you go. That's a leakage, right? So who has the responsibility of that? It's difficult, but the main learning is that pirates will never go over a threshold unless they have to. Right? And they don't need to hack anything today, because the technology is very, very easily used for piracy.
Right.
Just if I could come in on that one just briefly, at the sort of distribution point where we're getting a request for, we've got an HTTP or HTTPS request for some OTT content, right? What we've seen over time is people do implement more and more techniques for synchronous or asynchronous authentication, but implementing more and more techniques in the request and response flow to ensure that you capture who it is who's actually requesting the content. So if you gain your traceability through the request and response flow, who requested the content, do we have enough information to identify where, what, when, why, and how, then you can start to implement some of the other features. I can't solve, as a distributor of content over the internet, the pipes of the internet, someone filming a screen. I can't solve that from my perspective, but we've seen people use inline logic, we've seen people use advanced configuration tools, we've seen people use log analysis in great levels of detail to protect their content, to protect their rights, and to protect the software they're distributing. So there certainly is a lot you can think of to do in how you manage request and response flows for, can I get this content? What's your authentication authorization process? There are many things you can do in the HTTP and HTTPS response flow that we do a lot for a lot of content owners.
If I could just make one last comment on that. So in the Korea case, just take that exactly only one example in one country and one distribution model. Every single one of the people who uploaded is a subscriber to one of those 9 services. So that's our universe of potential uploaders, and that's what we're going after. We're going after the supply. So obviously, if no one ever uploads the content, we don't have any users that are pirating the content because they didn't have access to it. So from our perspective, the big win is to go after uploaders, the distributors of the content, who are always a much smaller number than the users, always.
Question?
So generally, consumers in the sort of Cody box world, they're innocent. They think they're buying legitimate services. So what approaches are we seeing taken in the market to kind of upsell them to legitimate services when those streams are disrupted?
Okay, so to repeat your question, consumers, obviously think they're getting legitimate TV services from things like Cody boxes. What can the industry do, whether it's operators or distributors, to sort of upsell those consumers with legitimate services, kind of differentiate them, sort of like say, hey, you should go legitimate, and here's why? Okay.
I think that's actually a very good point. And the reason why it's a good point, that points back to what can you do in anti-piracy to get to that point. And anti-piracy is not always about just, shutting everything down at the same time. And so, but it's also about disturbance, right? It's making sure that what they are getting when they're actually buying a pirate product is not as good a service as you would an official service. So the way to upsell it would be, the quality of service and the stability of the service, so that we in the anti-piracy, industry can try to make the disturbances so that these services aren't as good as the other ones. Because face it, if the pirate services is just as good or better than the original ones and it's much cheaper, it's an uphill battle, right? So basically we need to disturb that ecosystem somehow.
Right.
And it's doable. It's absolutely doable. You just need to do it the right way.
And as you pointed out, that money has to be spent at the right place. I think this disturbance of these illegal services needs to be also done at the right time, right? If you know who's pirating the service and you know how to shut them down, you may want to think about, hey, if there is a final soccer game, right? If you do it during that time and you upset a lot of people that subscribe to this illegal service, the impact of the disruption will be, much bigger than if you do it at 2 o'clock at night and nobody notices.
But
So
that's also the time to upsell to
Yeah.
those people. It's like, okay, you want to see the second half of that match?
Tune
match? That's right, here it is. And maybe it's not my content, so of course I can give away other people's money, but maybe make it an introductory thing. So here's you get a month free or something like that. Of course, it's about reversing cord cutting and making accorded ads again, and it's all about, hey, you can have that content. It's just, and you do have to pay for it, but it really is will never be interrupted again, and you will be glad that you went back to legit.
But it's also about education. I used to argue that people who steal content know they are stealing it. I'm not sure it's the case anymore, because some of these services look so professional, right? The quality is actually very good. And so many people may have this feeling, well, I paid for this box, or I'm paying $10 here.
Money.
Must be legal, right, if I'm paying.
Right.
So I think there needs to be awareness of that not every service is legal and that it has an impact on the true content. So I think there are technological means, there are educational means, there are legal means.
And business means.
Right? The right proposition, right? We should be motivated to buy the right service and the right content, but that takes effort too, right?
I'll just give you examples. Is that if you go into certain areas of the U.S., it's easily available for you. If you go into a retail, just a regular shop, you can buy a pirate box with a lot of it. And that, how people supposed to know that that's not legal if it's in an official store? It's on the street. How do people know?
Right.
So that's also something that the business overall need to look into. Go into this. We've done a lot of research on retailers, and we stopped a lot of retailers for the companies that we worked with. But in general, this is a huge problem.
Well, sometimes the retailers don't know that it's illegal.
Yeah, well.
Sometimes.
Yeah, we've interviewed them, so they know, but they. But
I did say sometimes.
Yeah.
We should have a new logo that says illegal.
Okay, with that said, we're out of time. Obviously, you can come up afterwards and ask the panelists any questions you want, but let's give them a round of applause. That was a great conversation. Good job, guys. Fantastic.